They gave it a corporate name. They ran it like a business. And for nearly a decade, nobody talked. Brooklyn, New York, 1931. The commission had just been created. Lucky Luciano had eliminated both Joe Masuria and Salvatore Maranzano, ended the Castellammarese War, and built the most sophisticated criminal organization in American history. The five families had territories. The commission had rules. Organized crime was, for the first time, actually organized. But organization creates a problem that chaos never has: enforcement. When criminal enterprises operate as loose collections of independent gangs, violence is random, personal, tribal. But when those enterprises become structured, when territories have agreed borders and profits flow through established channels and bosses sit on governing committees, violence must become something different. It must become institutional. It must be authorized, directed, controlled, and above all, deniable. Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky understood this problem clearly. The commission needed a mechanism for enforcing its rules without any individual family being directly implicated. Contracts needed to be fulfilled. Traitors needed to be eliminated. Witnesses needed to disappear. And all of this needed to happen without the families themselves getting their hands dirty in ways that law enforcement could prove. The solution was elegant in its corporate logic. Outsource the killing. Create a separate organization, staffed by professional killers who operated independently of the families, funded through commission contributions, available to fulfill contracts approved by commission vote. The killers wouldn't know their clients. The clients wouldn't know the killers. The commission would be the intermediary, the board of directors authorizing expenditures. And the whole operation would be run out of Brooklyn, far enough from Manhattan to feel separate, close enough to be useful. They called it Murder Incorporated. The newspapers would later shorten it to Murder Incorporated. And in the 9 years of its operation, from approximately 1931 to 1940, it would fulfill somewhere between 400 and 1,000 contracts. Exact numbers remain disputed because the operation was so compartmentalized that no one person knew the full scope, not even Luciano. That was the point. But the real story was never only about the killing. To understand Murder Incorporated, you need to understand Louis Lepka Buckleter. Born in Manhattan's Lower East Side, Lepka had built a criminal career through labor racketeering, controlling unions through violence and extortion, extracting tribute from businesses that needed labor peace. He was connected to Luciano and Lansky's world through the same networks that bound the Jewish and Italian criminal communities together, and he was ruthless in ways that even hardened criminals found alarming. Lepka became the primary organizer and financial controller of Murder Incorporated. He handled the business side, collecting payments, maintaining the books, ensuring that money flowed from commission contributors to the killers who needed to be paid. He was, in the most literal sense possible, the executive director of a murder corporation. But the operational side, the actual planning and execution of killings, was managed by two men whose names would become synonymous with Murder Incorporated itself: Albert Anastasia and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel in the early years, and a Brooklyn crew centered around Abe Reles that became the operation's primary instrument. Albert Anastasia was already known in the underworld as someone who approached violence with something beyond mere willingness. He was called Lord High Executioner and the Mad Hatter, nicknames that capture a personality that found killing neither troubling nor distasteful, but simply professional. He managed the logistics of contracts with the same efficient attitude that a legitimate executive might bring to supply chain management. A contract arrived. Resources were allocated. The job was completed. Payment was received. What happened next changed the meaning of everything that came before. The Murder Incorporated killing crew was based in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, operating primarily out of Midnight Rose's candy store at the corner of Saratoga and Livonia Avenues. Midnight Rose herself, Rose Gold, an elderly woman who stayed open 24 hours, provided unwitting cover for the killers who gathered at her establishment at all hours, making calls, receiving instructions, waiting for assignments. To the neighborhood, they were just young men with nowhere better to be. To law enforcement, they were invisible because they seemed too mundane to be sinister. The killers themselves were a tight crew of Brooklyn Jews and Italians who'd grown up together in the same streets, shared the same poverty, and developed the same ruthless pragmatism about survival. Abe Reles, Harry Strauss, Martin Goldstein, Harry Mayone, Frank Abendando. Names that meant nothing to the public, but everything to the organization they served. They were professionals who killed people they'd never met, in cities they sometimes barely knew, for reasons they were never told. The compartmentalization was extreme and deliberate. A contract moved through the system like a piece of corporate paperwork. A commission boss with problem, an associate who'd stolen, a witness who might talk, a rival who needed eliminating, brought the matter to the appropriate channels. It was approved or rejected at a level above the killer's knowledge. If approved, the details were passed down through intermediaries. The killers received a name, a location, a description, and a payment structure. They received nothing else. They didn't know who had ordered the hit. They didn't know why. They had no relationship with the target that could create emotion or hesitation. They were surgeons performing procedures, not warriors fighting enemies. The professional distance was both the method's greatest strength and its most disturbing feature. The confidence in their presence did not mean certainty existed within them. The techniques were varied but methodical. Strangulation with a rope, the preferred method of Harry Pep Strauss, who was reportedly so efficient that he once killed a man while humming to himself. Ice picks through the ear, entering the brain with minimal external evidence of cause of death. Shootings managed to look like random street violence. Bodies dissolved in acid or buried in remote locations. The methods adapted to circumstances, but the professionalism remained constant, and the geography expanded. Murder Incorporated wasn't just a Brooklyn operation. Its killers traveled nationally, fulfilling contracts in Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, Detroit. The commission had national reach, which meant its enforcement arm needed national reach as well. A problem in Florida could be solved by sending a Brooklyn crew who had no local connections, no local enemies, no local reasons to be noticed. They'd arrive, complete the work, and return home. Local law enforcement would be left with a body and no leads because the killers had no relationship to the location. This was organizational genius applied to violence. Luciano and Lansky had taken the lessons of legitimate corporate structure: specialization, outsourcing, compartmentalization, professional distance between decision-makers and workers, and applied them to the most human of all acts. The result was an enforcement machine that made the Commission's rules actually enforceable, that gave organized crime something it had never had before: reliable, deniable, professional violence on demand. But there was something no one around them could fully understand. For 9 years, Murder Incorporated operated with almost complete impunity. Police were aware that organized killing was occurring. The body count was too high to ignore, but the compartmentalization made investigation nearly impossible. Without knowing who had ordered what, without connections between the killers and their clients, without anyone inside the operation willing to talk, law enforcement couldn't build cases that held. The break came from an unexpected direction. In 1940, Brooklyn District Attorney William O'Dwyer began investigating a series of murders in the borough that seemed connected. His investigators developed an informant network that eventually pointed toward the Brownsville crew. A series of arrests followed, and in the pressure of facing serious prosecution, several members of the crew began to crack. The most important was Abe Reles. Reles was a killer of confirmed brutality. He personally admitted to participating in more than a dozen murders during his time with Murder Incorporated. He was also, it turned out, someone who valued his own life above loyalty to his organization. When faced with evidence of his crimes and the prospect of execution, Reles made a calculation that his partners wouldn't have believed possible from him. He talked. He became the most significant criminal informant in American history to that point. For months, he talked to prosecutors. He described contracts, methods, participants, logistics. He named names at every level of the organization, from street-level killers to the executives who arranged contracts. He could place specific people at specific murders with the kind of detail that only direct witness testimony provides. And he was corroborated, piece by piece, as the physical evidence's testimony pointed to was found. He built a world that looked controlled, even while carrying burdens no one could see. The prosecutions that followed were devastating. Multiple Murder Incorporated members were convicted and executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Lepka Buckleter, the executive director of the entire operation, was prosecuted and executed. one of the very few organized crime bosses to face that penalty. Albert Anastasia, the operational heart of Murder Incorporated, was indicted but would ultimately escape prosecution through a combination of legal maneuvering and the disappearance of witnesses. Luciano himself, already in prison on prostitution charges, was insulated from Murder Incorporated prosecution by the same compartmentalization that protected the commission from the killers. The connection was known, but proving it in court was another matter. He'd built the system specifically to protect the decision-makers from the consequences of their decisions. But Lepka's execution was a warning. The corporate structure had limits. Eventually, someone would talk. Eventually, the professional distance between decision-makers and killers would be bridged by testimony. Eventually, the machine would generate the one witness it couldn't control. What people called legendary often began as something deeply personal. That witness was Abe Reles. And on November 12, 1941, while under 24-hour police guard on the 6th floor of the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island, Abe Reles went out a window. He was found dead on the hotel's roof extension, several stories below his room. The official explanation was accident. He had apparently been trying to escape or had fallen while attempting some kind of prank. It convinced almost nobody. The man who had survived Brooklyn streets, who had participated in dozens of murders, who was protected by round-the-clock police guards specifically because his testimony was invaluable to ongoing prosecutions. This man had accidentally fallen from a window while detectives slept in the next room. The underworld immediately understood what had happened. The canary who could sing but couldn't fly became the darkest joke in criminal circles, a phrase that captured both the mockery of law enforcement's failure to protect its witness and the grim satisfaction that the threat Reles represented had been eliminated. The guards who'd been assigned to protect him were investigated but never charged. Who had arranged for the guards to be inattentive at precisely the right moment remained officially unresolved. The image was real, so was the silence afterward. Reles' death crippled the Murder Incorporated prosecutions. Cases that had been built on his testimony lost their foundation. Albert Anastasia, against whom Reles had provided the most damaging testimony, was never convicted of the murders Reles described. He would go on to run his own family for another decade and a half until his own appointment with violence. Shot in a barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel in 1957, in a murder that remained officially unsolved. The pattern was grimly consistent. Murder Incorporated had generated the testimony that began to dismantle it, and then the organization had demonstrated once more that it could reach anyone, anywhere, even in a police-protected hotel room on the 6th floor. Luciano received news of Reles' death from his prison cell. Whatever he knew about how it happened, whatever role his influence might have played in the arrangements, he kept to himself. He was already serving his 30 to 50-year sentence. Adding Murder Incorporated conspiracy charges would have made his legal situation catastrophically worse. His silence on the subject was both strategic and probably enforced by the same compartmentalization that had protected him throughout. But the damage was done. Murder Incorporated as an operational entity was finished. The Brooklyn crew had been decimated by prosecution and execution. Lepka was dead. The systematic outsourcing of violence that had made the Commission's enforcement arm so effective was dismantled, its members dead, imprisoned, or scattered. Many knew the legend, the Killing Company, the Brooklyn Murder Squad, the 400 contracts, the canary who couldn't fly. But very few understood the organizational logic that created it. The recognition that power without enforcement is theory, that rules without consequences are suggestions, that the clean separation between decision-making and implementation is what allows powerful people to make terrible decisions without direct personal accountability. That recognition came from somewhere much deeper, from Luciano and Lansky's understanding that they were building institutions, not gangs, that institutions require mechanisms of enforcement, that those mechanisms, to be sustainable, must be managed with the same professionalism and compartmentalization as every other institutional function. The real story was never only about the murders or the methods or even the extraordinary criminal organization that performed them with such grim efficiency. It was about what Murder Incorporated revealed about power and accountability, about how the distance between the people who make decisions and the people who implement them can become a tool, protecting the powerful from the consequences of their choices, while ensuring those choices get made and enforced. That structure didn't begin or end with Murder Incorporated. It's visible in every institution that creates barriers between decision-makers and implementers, that uses specialization and compartmentalization to diffuse moral responsibility across enough people that no single person seems fully culpable for the outcome. Murder Incorporated was organized crime's version of a problem that legitimate institutions also struggle with. How do you maintain the power to enforce your rules while ensuring that enforcement can't be traced back to you? How do you create accountability for others while avoiding accountability yourself? Luciano solved it the way he solved most problems, with organizational structure, professional distance, and the strategic use of other people's skills. The result was a killing machine of unprecedented efficiency, and its eventual destruction came not from superior law enforcement or greater moral force, but from the single element that all organizations fear most, the insider who decides their own survival matters more than loyalty. Abe Reles sang, and then he flew, the canary who could sing but couldn't fly, the 400 murders, the candy store in Brooklyn where death was dispatched with corporate efficiency, the window in Coney Island that ended both a witness and an era. Lucky Luciano built Murder Incorporated as the enforcement arm of a criminal revolution. It worked exactly as designed, for exactly as long as every human organization works before the human element. Fear, ambition, self-preservation overrides the institutional logic. It was the most efficient killing operation in American criminal history. It ended when a killer decided he'd rather talk than die. And even that ending carried the organization's shadow. The talking killer fell from a window, and nobody was ever held responsible for fall. That's the final lesson of Murder Incorporated. The organization protected itself even in death. The canary sang, but couldn't fly, and the men who built the cage walked away, as they so often did, without facing the full weight of what they'd built.